Stop right there. Step down from the ladder, now.
What? Why? I'm working. I didn't do anything.
We got a call about immigration violations at this address. I need ID. Status, right now.
Immigration? Man, I'm painting the house. I'm a U.S. citizen. Born here.
Don't argue with me. Get down. Show proof of citizenship.
Here, Ohio driver.
Lawrence Bennett couldn't believe what was happening. 20 minutes ago, he'd been peacefully painting the second story of a colonial home in suburban Maryland, his brushstrokes steady and practiced after 15 years in the business. Now 2 IC agents stood in the driveway below, demanding he prove he had the right to exist in the country where he was born. The security camera mounted on the garage had recorded everything: the confrontation with the neighbor, her threats to call immigration, and now this surreal scene of federal agents treating an American citizen like a criminal. What Lawrence didn't know was that this footage would become the centerpiece of a lawsuit that would expose the deadly consequences of racial profiling and cost the federal government nearly $15 million. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Lawrence Bennett came from a family of builders and craftsmen who had fought for their place in industries that didn't always welcome black workers. His grandfather, Samuel Bennett, had been a mason in 1960s Cleveland, one of the first black men admitted to the local trade union after years of discrimination and deliberate exclusion. Samuel had built his reputation one brick at a time, literally, earning respect through skill that couldn't be denied even by those who wanted to deny it. He'd worked on some of Cleveland's most recognizable buildings, his craftsmanship still visible today in the intricate brickwork of churches, schools, and municipal buildings throughout the city. Lawrence's father, Thomas Bennett, had expanded the family business into general contracting in the 1980s, a decade when black business ownership faced countless obstacles from discriminatory lending practices to customers who assumed incompetence based on skin color. Thomas had persevered, building a small but respected company that employed a dozen workers at its peak, taking on projects that ranged from residential renovations to small commercial builds. He'd taught Lawrence that excellence was non-negotiable, that their work had to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy, that reputation was everything when society assumed the worst. Lawrence had learned to paint from his uncle Jerome during summer breaks from high school, spending long days in the Ohio heat learning how to prep surfaces properly, how to cut clean lines, how to match colors perfectly. Jerome had been particular about his craft, treating each job as if it were going into a museum rather than someone's living room. People judge our work differently, Jerome had told a teenage Lawrence. White painter makes a mistake, it's just a mistake. We make a mistake, it's because we're black. So we don't make mistakes. That philosophy had stayed with Lawrence through college at Ohio State, where he'd studied business while painting houses on weekends to pay tuition. After graduation in 2008, right into the teeth of the Great Recession, Lawrence had made a decision that surprised his family. Instead of looking for corporate jobs that weren't hiring anyway, he'd start his own painting company. His father had given him one truck, some equipment, and advice. Be professional. Be excellent. Be patient. Success for us takes longer, but it's sweeter when it comes. Bennett Custom Painting had started small, just Lawrence and one helper taking any job they could get. Apartment touch-ups. Small residential jobs. Rental property work that paid minimum rates. But Lawrence's attention to detail, his professionalism, and his fair pricing gradually built a client base. Word spread, particularly among homeowners who'd been burned by sloppy contractors. By 2015 he had 3 full-time employees. By 2020, despite the pandemic, he had 6 employees, 3 trucks, and more work than he could handle. Now at 38, Lawrence had built something he was proud of. His company had painted over 1,000 homes across Maryland and Northern Virginia. He had commercial clients, property management companies, and a waiting list of residential customers. He'd bought a house for his mother, put his younger sister through college, and employed workers who might not have found opportunities elsewhere. He paid above market rates, provided health insurance, and treated his employees with respect. He'd achieved what his grandfather and father had fought for: success on his own terms, built on skill and reputation. The Whitmore residence in Bethesda had been a standard job, the kind Lawrence had done hundreds of times. The homeowners, Helen and Robert Whitmore, were a retired couple who wanted their home's exterior freshly painted before their daughter's wedding in early July. They'd hired Lawrence after seeing his work on a neighbor's house 3 streets over, impressed by the clean lines and attention to detail. The contract was for $12,000, a 2-week job to scrape, prime and paint the entire exterior of their 2-story colonial in a soft gray that Helen had agonized over for weeks before finally selecting. Lawrence had started on Tuesday morning, May 2nd, working alone on this particular day because his crew was finishing another project in Silver Spring that was running slightly behind schedule. He didn't mind working solo occasionally. It gave him time to think, to focus on the craft, to remember why he'd fallen in love with this work in the first place. There was something meditative about painting, the repetitive motion of brush against surface, watching color transform and renew something old into something fresh. Wednesday, May 3, 2023 dawned clear and warm, one of those perfect late spring days in the mid-Atlantic when the humidity hadn't yet arrived but the temperature was comfortable enough to work outside all day. Lawrence arrived at the Whitmore house at 7:30 a.m., his white Ford F-250 with Bennett Custom Painting licensed and insured, family-owned since 2008, emblazoned on the side in professional lettering, parked prominently in the driveway. He'd already completed the scraping and priming over the previous day and a half. Today was all about applying the finish coat, the part of the job where his skill and experience would be most visible. The Whitmores had left for a doctor's appointment in Baltimore around 8 a.m., giving Lawrence a key to their garage where he could access water for cleaning brushes and store his equipment securely. Helen had made him coffee before leaving, chatting about her daughter's wedding, thanking him for accommodating their tight timeline. It was the kind of client interaction Lawrence appreciated. Respectful, friendly, treating him as a professional rather than just hired labor. He set up his ladder against the front of the house, positioned his paint supplies on a drop cloth, and climbed up to start on the second-story trim around the windows. The neighborhood was quiet in that particular way affluent suburbs are on weekday mornings. People at work, kids at school, the only sounds the occasional car passing and birds in the mature trees lining the street. Lawrence had worked in dozens of neighborhoods like this over the years, from Potomac to McLean to Chevy Chase. Usually people ignored him, absorbed in their own lives. Occasionally someone would wave politely or stop to ask about his services for their own home. He'd never had problems. The security camera mounted on the Whitmore's garage, a high-definition ring system that Helen had installed after a package theft the previous year, captured everything that happened next in crystal-clear detail with time-stamps and audio that would later prove invaluable in court. At 9:47 a.m., a white BMW X5 pulled up and parked across the street. A woman emerged, mid-50s with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing expensive Lululemon athleisure, wearing Gucci sunglasses. This was Patricia Hendricks, who lived 4 houses down at number 4702 and was on her way back from her personal training session at an exclusive gym in Georgetown. The camera recorded her stopping on the sidewalk, staring up at Lawrence as he painted, her expression shifting from casual interest to visible suspicion over the course of about 30 seconds. She pulled out her iPhone, appeared to take several photos of Lawrence and his truck, zooming in on his license plate, then walked purposefully across the street and into the Whitmore's driveway with the determined stride of someone on a mission. "Excuse me," she called up to Lawrence, her voice sharp and carrying an edge of entitlement. "What are you doing here?" Lawrence paused his brushstroke and looked down, his expression polite but slightly puzzled. This wasn't an unusual question from neighbors, but something about her tone set off warning bells. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm painting the house. The Whitmores hired me to do their exterior." The Whitmores didn't mention having work done, Patricia said, her hands moving to her hips in a confrontational stance. The camera captured her aggressive posture, the accusatory tone evident even in the video's audio. "I was just talking to Helen last week. She didn't say anything about painters." Lawrence kept his voice calm and professional, the tone he'd perfected over 15 years of dealing with difficult clients and nosy neighbors. "I'm not sure what homeowners share with their neighbors about maintenance projects, ma'am, but I have a signed contract with Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. I'm a licensed painter. This is my business." He gestured to his truck with its professional lettering. "Where are the Whitmores now?" Patricia demanded, her voice taking on an edge of accusation as if she'd caught Lawrence in a lie. "They went to a medical appointment in Baltimore. They said they'd be back this afternoon around 3. Lawrence turned back to his work, hoping the conversation was over, hoping this woman would go back to whatever she'd been doing before deciding to interrogate him. It wasn't over. "I don't think you should be here alone," Patricia said, pulling out her phone again. "This doesn't look right. You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood." Lawrence felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times throughout his life when someone decided his skin color meant he was suspicious, threatening, out of place. He'd felt it in college when campus security stopped him 3 times in one semester to ask if he was a student. He'd felt it in stores when he was followed by security despite being a paying customer. He'd felt it when driving through certain neighborhoods when police pulled him over for matching a description. And now he was feeling it on a job site, doing legitimate work, being questioned for no reason other than the color of his skin. He climbed down the ladder slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening, years of knowing how to de-escalate situations with people who saw him as dangerous guiding his actions. He approached Patricia with his business card extended, maintaining a respectful distance. "Ma'am, I'm Lawrence Bennett. This is my company, Bennett Custom Painting. I'm licensed, bonded, and insured. I have all the proper permits for this work. The Whitmores can verify everything when they return. I'm just here to do my job and do it well." The security camera captured Patricia refusing to take the card, actually stepping back as if Lawrence's extended hand posed some kind of threat. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice rising. "And immigration. We have a serious problem with illegal workers in this neighborhood, and I'm not going to let it continue. Someone needs to verify you're supposed to be here." "Illegal workers?" Lawrence's voice rose slightly despite his efforts to remain calm, his professional composure cracking. "Ma'am, I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. I own this business. I employ 6 American citizens. I pay taxes. I'm not illegal anything." "That's what they all say," Patricia sneered, her face twisting into an expression of disgust that the camera captured in perfect clarity. "You people come here, undercut real American workers, probably don't pay taxes, probably hire other illegals. I'm calling IC right now." Should federal immigration enforcement respond to racially motivated calls without verifying the complaint? Comment below, because what happened next shows how easily bias can weaponize government agencies against innocent citizens. "You people?" Lawrence repeated, his anger now fully evident despite years of training himself to swallow it. "You mean black people? You mean American citizens trying to earn an honest living? What exactly do you mean by you people, ma'am?" "I mean people who don't belong here," Patricia said, her phone already at her ear. The security camera recorded her entire call in clear audio, every word that would later be played in court, every assumption and accusation preserved digitally. "Yes, I need to report illegal workers at 4738 Maple Ridge Drive in Bethesda, Maryland. There's a man here, Hispanic or maybe black, I can't tell exactly, working on a house. He's probably illegal. The homeowners aren't present. He could be casing the place for all I know. Yes, I'll wait for someone to come. No, I'm not in immediate danger, but this needs to be handled. We can't have these people just working in our neighborhood without verification. Thank you." She hung up and smiled at Lawrence with unmistakable satisfaction, the expression of someone who believed they'd done their civic duty. "Immigration and Customs Enforcement will be here within the hour. We'll see about your citizenship status then. If you're legal like you claim, you have nothing to worry about, right?" Lawrence felt rage and helplessness warring inside him, his hands clenching into fists before he consciously relaxed them, knowing any sign of aggression would be used against him. He pulled out his own phone and called Helen Whitmore, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Lawrence Bennett. I'm very sorry to bother you during your appointment, but there's a situation at your house that requires your attention. A neighbor has called immigration enforcement on me." "No, ma'am, I'm physically fine, but she's claiming I'm here illegally and shouldn't be on your property." "Yes, ma'am, if you could call her or come back and explain that I'm supposed to be here, I would greatly appreciate it." "Her name?" He looked at Patricia with barely concealed anger. "What's your name, ma'am?" "You don't need my name," Patricia said, crossing her arms defensively. "You'll know it when IC gets here and asks me for my statement as the concerned citizen who reported you." Lawrence relayed this to Helen, who he could hear becoming increasingly agitated on the other end of the line. She promised to leave the doctor's office immediately and drive back, estimated 20 to 30 minutes depending on traffic on the Beltway. Lawrence thanked her and ended the call, then made a decision that would prove crucial to his case. He pulled up his phone's video recording app and began filming the interaction. "I'm documenting this," he said clearly, pointing the camera at Patricia. "For my protection and for the record of what's happening here." "Record whatever you want," Patricia said dismissively. "The truth is the truth. You're working here without the homeowners present, and I have every right to question that." "You have every right to question it by asking me, which you did, and I answered," Lawrence said, his lawyer's instinct taking over despite never having been to law school. "What you don't have a right to do is call federal immigration enforcement on an American citizen based solely on their appearance and your assumptions about who does manual labor." The argument continued for another 15 minutes, the security camera and Lawrence's phone both recording every word. Patricia insisted she was protecting the neighborhood. Lawrence insisted she was racially profiling him. Other neighbors began to emerge from their houses, drawn by the raised voices. An elderly couple from across the street, the Johnsons, came over and tried to mediate, telling Patricia she was being unreasonable. A younger woman jogging by stopped to ask if everything was okay, her phone also out and recording. Then Helen Whitmore's car came screeching into the driveway at 10:23 a.m., her silver Lexus barely missing Patricia as it pulled in. Helen emerged from the driver's seat, her face flushed with anger and exertion. Her husband Robert getting out of the passenger side looking equally upset. "Patricia Hendricks, what on earth are you doing?" Helen demanded, her voice shaking with fury. The security camera recorded her immediate confrontation with Patricia, who stood on the sidewalk as if guarding the neighborhood from some imagined threat. "This is Lawrence Bennett. We hired him 2 weeks ago. He's been working here since yesterday. You had absolutely no right to call anyone." "I was protecting the neighborhood," Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty, the arrival of the actual homeowners clearly undermining her position. "How was I supposed to know you actually hired him? He doesn't look like a typical painter. He was here alone without you present. It looked suspicious." "Doesn't look like a typical painter?" Helen's voice rose to a near shout. "He looks exactly like a painter because he is a painter. He's one of the best reviewed contractors in the entire Washington metro area. And you called immigration on him? On an American citizen? On a man with a business license and insurance and a signed contract?" "I didn't know he was a citizen," Patricia said defensively. "He could have been illegal. How am I supposed to know?" "Based on what?" Robert Whitmore interjected, his voice cold and precise. "Based on what criteria did you determine he could have been illegal? What specific evidence led you to that conclusion?" Patricia faltered, realizing the trap. "Well, he was alone and you weren't here and he's black," Lawrence finished for her, his voice cutting. "I'm black. That's your evidence. That's your probable cause. You saw a black man doing exterior painting work and assumed I must be illegal." "I didn't say that," Patricia protested. "You didn't have to," Helen said, her fury undiminished. "Your actions said it clearly enough. You saw Lawrence, made assumptions based on his race and weaponized a federal agency against him. Do you understand how serious this is? Do you understand that you've committed a crime? False reporting? Harassment?" The argument escalated, all four voices rising, when a black Chevrolet Suburban pulled up at 10:53 a.m., parking across the street. Two IC agents emerged, both in tactical vests marked with bright yellow, police ICE lettering, both wearing body cameras that would later corroborate every detail of the security footage. Agent Michael Cordero approached first, a Latino man in his early 40s with short-cropped hair and an expression of professional neutrality. His partner, Agent Lisa Zhang, an Asian-American woman in her 30s, hung back near their vehicle, her hand resting on her belt in a posture that was both casual and ready. "Someone called about potential immigration violations at this address?" Cordero asked, his eyes scanning the group. Lawrence in his paint-splattered work clothes, Patricia in her expensive athleisure, Helen and Robert in business casual from their interrupted doctor's visit. "That would be me," Patricia said quickly, stepping forward eagerly. "This man is working here, and I don't believe he's legally authorized to work in this country." "Ma'am, I'm the homeowner," Helen interjected forcefully, moving between Patricia and the agents. "My husband and I own this property. This is Lawrence Bennett. He's our contractor. We hired him. He's supposed to be here. This woman has no connection to this property whatsoever. She's harassing my contractor based on nothing but racial profiling." Cordero looked at Lawrence, his expression professional but carrying an undertone of suspicion that Lawrence had seen too many times in interactions with law enforcement, that subtle shift in posture and tone that happened when officers dealt with black men. "Sir, we need you to stop what you're doing and step down from that ladder." Lawrence had climbed back up his ladder during the argument with Patricia, trying to return to work, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in this increasingly surreal situation. Now he paused mid-brushstroke, his hand steady on the brush but his mind racing. What? I'm in the middle of work here. What's this about?" "We received a report about potential immigration violations at this address," Cordero said, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon in a gesture that was simultaneously casual and threatening, a reminder of the power dynamic at play. "We need to see your identification and verify your immigration status." "Immigration violations?" Lawrence's voice carried frustration and disbelief in equal measure. "I'm painting a house. I'm a United States citizen. I own this business. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. I've never been outside North America except for one cruise to the Bahamas. That's what we're here to verify, sir, Cordero said, his voice taking on the flat, authoritative tone of law enforcement ending a discussion. Please come down from the ladder and show us your documents. The security camera captured Lawrence's face as he processed the situation, the complex mixture of emotions visible in his expression. Humiliation, anger, disbelief, and underneath it all, the calculation of a black man in America knowing that how he responded to law enforcement in the next few minutes could determine whether he went home safe or became another statistic. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice controlled but strained. That lady called you, didn't she? The one who was harassing me an hour ago? You're here because a racist neighbor made a phone call based on my skin color. Sir, come down from the ladder. Now. Cordero's voice had shifted from professional to authoritative, the implicit threat clear in his tone and posture. Lawrence climbed down slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, making sure every action was visible and non-threatening. He'd grown up black in America. His father had given him the talk, when he was 12, about how to interact with police, how to keep your hands visible, how to move slowly, how to speak respectfully even when being disrespected. Those lessons, learned in childhood and reinforced through hard experience, guided his actions now. My wallet is in my truck, he said, pointing to his vehicle parked in the driveway. My driver's license, my business license, my contractor's license, all my documentation is there in my work bag. We'll accompany you to your truck, Cordero said, gesturing for Lawrence to lead the way. Helen stepped forward, her anger undiminished. This is absolutely outrageous. I'm standing here as the property owner telling you that this man works for me, that he's supposed to be here, that he has every legal right to be here, and you're still demanding his papers? You're harassing an American citizen because some racist neighbor made a phone call. Ma'am, step back, Zhang said, finally speaking up. We're just doing our jobs. Your job is to enforce immigration law against actual violations, not to respond to racist vigilantes who weaponize your agency. Helen's voice was rising to a shout now. I want your supervisor's name. I want your badge numbers. I want the name of whoever authorized this response. This is going to be a formal complaint. This is going to be a lawsuit. The agents ignored her, following Lawrence to his truck. The security camera angle captured the scene in perfect detail. Lawrence opening the passenger door of his F-250, pulling out a leather work bag, unzipping it, removing his wallet, carefully extracting his driver's license, his Maryland state business license, his general contractor's license, his liability insurance card, his bonding certification. All the documentation that proved his legal right to exist, to work, to own a business in the country of his birth, now being demanded as if he were a suspect in some crime. Cordero examined each document with what seemed like exaggerated care, holding each up to the light as if checking for forgery, taking photos of each with his government-issued phone, reading the information aloud to Zhang, who wrote it down in a small notebook. Then he called in Lawrence's information to verify through whatever database IC used for such things. The process took 20 agonizing minutes. 20 minutes of Lawrence standing in his client's driveway, surrounded by agents, neighbors and cameras, being treated like a criminal. 20 minutes of Patricia watching with satisfaction from the sidewalk. 20 minutes of Helen and Robert pacing and fuming, making their own phone calls to lawyers and friends. 20 minutes that would be burned into Lawrence's memory, that would change how he felt every single time he showed up to a job site for the rest of his career. Mr. Bennett, Cordero finally said, his voice neutral but perhaps carrying the slightest edge of discomfort. Your documentation appears to be in order. You're a United States citizen. You have valid licenses for your business. You're legally authorized to work in this country. I told you that, Lawrence said, his voice tight with controlled anger, every word measured. I told you that from the very beginning. I told you I was a citizen. I told you I own this business. But you didn't believe me. You demanded proof. You pulled me off a ladder where I was doing legitimate work. You've wasted half an hour of my time. You've humiliated me in front of my clients. And for what? Because a racist woman made a phone call? We still needed to verify, Cordero said, handing back the documents, his voice stiff and defensive. We have to respond to all reports we receive. Free to continue? Lawrence's laugh was harsh and bitter. You pull me off a ladder where I'm trying to earn a living, treat me like I'm some kind of illegal immigrant, waste 30 minutes of my day while I'm on a deadline, humiliate me in front of a client and half the neighborhood, and now I'm just free to continue, as if nothing happened? Just like that. Sir, we were responding to a complaint. A racist complaint. Lawrence's voice finally rose to a shout, all his professional composure shattering under the weight of accumulated indignity. That woman saw a black man working with his hands and her brain immediately jumped to illegal immigrant. She had zero evidence. Zero specific reasons. No suspicious behavior. No actual violations. Just a black man doing honest work. And you responded. You came here with your vests and your guns and your authority and you demanded my papers based on nothing but her racial profiling. Zhang shifted uncomfortably, her body camera capturing her expression of growing uncertainty. Cordero's face remained mostly neutral, but the security footage showed the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was beginning to realize they had made a serious error. Helen joined Lawrence's protest, her voice sharp and accusatory. He's absolutely right. You know he's right. Patricia called you because Lawrence is black. That's the only reason. She saw a black man in work clothes and assumed he must be illegal. She provided you with zero evidence of any actual immigration violation. And you responded without question. You didn't ask for specifics. You didn't request evidence. You didn't verify whether the call had any merit. You just showed up and started demanding papers from an American citizen. That's not law enforcement. That's racial profiling with a badge. Do you think ICE should be required to verify complaints before deploying agents to private residences? Comment below because what happened here exposes how racial bias can turn federal agencies into tools of harassment. Robert added his voice, his tone cold and legal. I'm an attorney agents. And what you've done here today is create federal civil rights liability. You've detained an American citizen without probable cause. You've subjected him to an investigatory stop based solely on an uncorroborated report that appears motivated by racial animus. You've violated his Fourth Amendment rights. And it's all on camera. He gestured to the security camera on the garage and the various phones that neighbors were still holding up. Cordero and Zhang exchanged glances, the security camera capturing their increasing discomfort as the reality of the situation sank in. They had been weaponized by a racist caller. Their response had lacked any skepticism or verification. They had subjected an American citizen to the humiliation of having to prove his right to exist in his own country. And it was all documented from multiple angles. We apologize for the inconvenience, Cordero said, his voice stiff and formal, the words clearly required by training but lacking any genuine emotion. Inconvenience. Lawrence's voice was incredulous. You think this is an inconvenience? This is my livelihood you're attacking. I run a business. I have a reputation. Word gets around in the contractor community. Word gets around among clients. Did you hear ICE showed up at one of Lawrence Bennett's job sites? Suddenly clients start wondering. Potential customers start asking questions. My competitors start whispering. This isn't an inconvenience, Agent Cordero. This is an attack on everything I've built over 15 years. The agents had nothing more to say. They had done their job as they understood it, responded to a call, verified documentation. But they were beginning to understand that their job had been weaponized, that they had been used as tools of racial harassment, and that there would be consequences. They returned to their SUV and drove away, leaving Lawrence standing in the driveway, his hands shaking with adrenaline and suppressed rage. Helen immediately approached him, her face showing genuine distress. Lawrence, I am so sorry this happened. This never should have happened. I'm going to make this right however I can. It's not your fault, Mrs. Whitmore, Lawrence said, his voice hollow now as the adrenaline faded into exhaustion. It's not your fault at all. It's hers. He pointed at Patricia, still standing on the sidewalk like a stubborn sentry. And it's a system that lets people like her weaponize federal agencies against people like me based on nothing but skin color. Patricia, sensing that public opinion had turned decisively against her, sensing that she might face actual consequences for her actions, walked quickly back to her BMW and drove away. The security camera captured her retreat, the final image of a woman who had caused chaos and humiliation, who had wielded racism like a weapon, and who believed she would face no consequences. She was wrong about that. Lawrence finished the Whitmore job over the next week, though his heart wasn't in it anymore. Every brushstroke felt heavy with the weight of what had happened. Every time a car drove slowly past, he tensed, wondering if it was another agent, another person ready to question his right to exist. Helen and Robert apologized repeatedly, offered to pay him extra for the harassment he'd endured. He declined the extra money but appreciated their support. They wrote him a glowing review online and gave him referrals to several neighbors, though Patricia Hendricks was conspicuously not among them. But money and apologies wouldn't fix this. What would fix it, Lawrence decided with growing conviction, was accountability. Justice. Making sure this never happened to anyone else. 3 days after the incident, Lawrence walked into the offices of Morrison and Associates, a civil rights law firm in Washington, D.C. with a formidable reputation for taking on governmental overreach and winning. He brought the security footage on a thumb drive, his own phone video, contact information for the Whitmores and other witnesses, and a determination forged through generations of Black Americans fighting for their rights. Attorney Rebecca Morrison, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of injustice, watched the security footage 3 times. Her expression grew progressively more serious with each viewing. When the third replay finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and looked at Lawrence with a mixture of sympathy and professional excitement. Mr. Bennett, in 20 years of civil rights practice, this is one of the clearest cases of racial profiling and governmental harassment I've ever seen. We have high-definition video evidence of the initial confrontation showing explicitly racist language. We have audio of the call to IC showing assumptions based solely on race. We have footage of the ICE response showing they demanded your papers without any verification of the complaint's merit. We have multiple witnesses. This is extraordinarily actionable. I want to sue, Lawrence said simply, his voice calm but carrying steel underneath. I want Patricia Hendricks to understand she can't do this to people without consequences. I want ICE to understand they can't respond to racist calls like trained attack dogs without any independent judgment. And I want everyone who sees this case to understand that American citizens have rights, regardless of their skin color, regardless of what kind of work they do. Morrison nodded slowly, already formulating strategy. We'll file a comprehensive complaint against Patricia Hendricks individually for false reporting, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process. Against the federal government and the specific ICE agents for violating your Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure, for racial profiling, for unlawful detention, and for deprivation of rights under color of law. Can we win? Lawrence asked, though he already knew the answer from her expression. Mr. Bennett, Morrison said, a slight smile touching her lips, with this footage, with these facts, with this clear documentation of racial profiling? Absolutely. The only question is how much they'll pay to make this go away, and whether we let them settle or we take it to trial to set a precedent. Trial? Lawrence said immediately. I want a jury to see this. I want it on the record. I want other contractors, other Black business owners, other American citizens to know they can fight back and win. Morrison's smile broadened. Then that's exactly what we'll do. The lawsuit was filed exactly 2 weeks after the incident. Lawrence Bennett versus Patricia Hendricks and United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement et al. The federal complaint was 68 pages of devastating detail, walking methodically through every moment of the confrontation, every racist assumption, every violation of constitutional rights, every failure of ICE to exercise independent judgment before subjecting an American citizen to investigation. The security footage was attached as Exhibit A. The body camera footage from the ICE agents, obtained through discovery, became Exhibit B. Lawrence's business licenses and documentation became Exhibit C. Witness statements from Helen and Robert Whitmore, from neighbors who had watched the confrontation, from other contractors who shared similar stories of racial profiling, filled the rest of the exhibits. When the complaint was filed with the federal court and became public record, the media reaction was immediate and intense. Black business owner detained by ICE after racist neighbors call, caught on camera. Security footage exposes racial profiling in Maryland. Painter sues after immigration agents demand papers from U.S. citizen. The security footage went viral within hours. Millions of views. Thousands of shares. Comment sections filled with outrage and stories from others who had experienced similar profiling. Lawrence's phone rang constantly with interview requests from local news, national news, cable networks. Other business owners reached out sharing their own stories of being questioned, being reported, being assumed to be illegal based on their appearance. Patricia Hendricks went into full retreat. Her social media accounts disappeared overnight. Her house went up for sale within a week. She released a carefully worded statement through her attorney claiming she had been concerned for neighborhood safety and had no racial motivation whatsoever. The statement was immediately eviscerated online and in legal filings, the security footage disproving every word with crystal clarity. ICE initially defended its agents and its protocols, issuing a statement that Cordero and Zhang had followed proper procedure in responding to a report of potential immigration violations. But as public pressure mounted, as civil rights organizations demanded accountability, as the footage continued to spread showing agents demanding papers from an American citizen with zero probable cause, the agency's position became increasingly untenable. The case went to trial 19 months after the incident, in January 2025. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was packed daily with supporters who saw Lawrence's case as their own fight, with civil rights activists, with media covering every moment, with other contractors and small business owners who understood exactly what Lawrence had experienced. Lawrence testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through his family history, his business, his credentials, the confrontation with Patricia, the humiliation of being detained by ICE. "I used to love my work," he told the jury, his voice breaking despite his attempts to maintain composure. "I'd wake up excited to create something beautiful, to transform an old house into something fresh and new. I took pride in carrying on my grandfather's and father's legacy, in building a business that treated people fairly and did excellent work. Now I wake up anxious. Every job site, I wonder if some neighbor is going to call IC. Every time a car slows down near where I'm working, I tense up. I can't enjoy my work anymore. That woman and those agents stole my peace. They stole my sense of belonging in my own country." Helen Whitmore testified about witnessing the confrontation, about Patricia's explicitly racist language, about the ICE agents' immediate assumption of guilt. "They didn't ask questions," she told the jury. "They didn't verify anything. They saw a black man and demanded his papers. That's not immigration enforcement. That's racial profiling with federal authority behind it." Morrison called Dr. James Wellington, a prominent sociologist from Georgetown University who had spent 30 years studying racial profiling in law enforcement. His testimony was methodical and damning. "What we observe in this security footage is a textbook example of what scholars call working while black," he explained, using charts and data to support his analysis. Ms. Hendricks observed a black man engaged in manual labor, and her racial biases immediately categorized him as other, as illegal, as not belonging in her affluent neighborhood. ICE's response, deploying agents without any verification of the complaint's merit, demonstrates how racial bias in civilian reports can be amplified and legitimized by law enforcement response, creating a system where American citizens can be subjected to investigation based solely on their appearance. The defense tried multiple strategies. They argued that Cordero and Zhang had followed protocol, that they were required to respond to all immigration-related calls, that they had no way of knowing the complaint lacked merit until they investigated. Morrison systematically dismantled each argument. "Required to respond, yes," she said during her devastating cross-examination of Cordero. "But required to immediately demand papers without asking any preliminary questions? Required to pull an American citizen off a ladder based on zero evidence? Required to conduct a 20-minute investigation into someone's legal status without any probable cause beyond an anonymous phone call? That's not protocol, Agent Cordero. That's abdication of judgment. That's allowing your agency to be weaponized by civilian racism." The security footage played multiple times during the trial, each viewing seeming more damaging than the last. The jury watched Patricia's racist language, her unfounded assumptions, her satisfaction at calling federal agents. They watched Lawrence's calm professionalism, his attempts to de-escalate, his compliance with the agent's demands. They watched the agent's failure to question the complaint's basis, their immediate demands for documentation, their treatment of an American citizen as presumptively illegal. Several jurors were visibly angry by the third viewing. One wiped away tears during Lawrence's testimony. Another shook his head repeatedly during the security footage playback. The jury deliberated for 14 hours spread across 3 days. When they returned to the courtroom, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Patricia Hendricks was liable for false reporting, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process. The federal government and the individual ICE agents were liable for civil rights violations, unlawful detention, racial profiling, and violation of Fourth Amendment protections. The damages phase took another full week. Expert witnesses testified about Lawrence's psychological trauma, his diagnosed anxiety and depression following the incident, his damaged sense of security. They heard from a business valuation expert who calculated the impact on Lawrence's company from canceled contracts and lost referrals. They heard from other contractors about the tax that black business owners pay in having their credentials constantly questioned. When the jury foreman announced the damages award, the courtroom erupted in sustained applause that even the judge didn't try to stop for almost a minute. $14.8 million total. $2.3 million against Patricia Hendricks personally for false reporting, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, essentially bankrupting her and sending an unmistakable message about the consequences of weaponizing government agencies through racist calls. $12.5 million against the United States government for civil rights violations, unlawful detention, racial profiling, and systematic failure to implement safeguards against discriminatory enforcement, one of the largest awards in a racial profiling case in federal court history. Lawrence sat in stunned silence as the numbers were read, Rebecca Morrison's hand on his shoulder, his mother crying beside him, his sister squeezing his hand. The money was substantial, truly life-changing, but more important than any dollar amount was the message, the validation, the statement from 12 ordinary citizens that what had been done to him was wrong, was unconstitutional, and would carry severe consequences. Patricia Hendricks filed for bankruptcy within a month. Her house sold at a significant loss. She became a pariah in Bethesda, eventually moving out of state, her name permanently attached to one of the most clear-cut cases of racist harassment caught on camera. Both ICE agents were placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Cordero resigned before he could be fired, his law enforcement career effectively over. Jean underwent extensive additional training, received a formal reprimand that would follow her entire career, and was reassigned to office work away from field enforcement. The agency itself announced sweeping policy changes in response to the verdict and the public outcry. Mandatory verification of all calls alleging immigration violations before deploying agents, supervisory approval required for any detention or investigation at job sites, comprehensive bias training for all field agents, regular review of body camera footage for signs of discriminatory enforcement, and creation of a civil rights compliance division to handle complaints. Lawrence used a significant portion of his settlement to establish the Bennett Foundation for Contractor Rights, providing free legal representation for small business owners facing discrimination, harassment, or civil rights violations. He became a sought-after speaker at business conferences, diversity training sessions, and civil rights forums, sharing his story and advocating for systemic change. The security footage became required viewing in civil rights law classes at universities across the country, a perfect case study in how racism operates in modern America, how implicit bias can weaponize government power, and how ordinary citizens with courage and documentation can fight back against injustice and win. And in Bethesda, Maryland, at 4738 Maple Ridge Drive, the Whitmore House stands with its perfect gray paint, a testament to Lawrence Bennett's craftsmanship. Helen and Robert Whitmore have a small plaque by their front door that reads, "Painted by Bennett Custom Painting, Excellence Despite Injustice, May 2023. It's their private reminder that some battles are worth fighting, that some victories matter beyond money. If you believe racial profiling in any form is unacceptable, that federal agencies must exercise independent judgment rather than blindly responding to racist complaints, and that constitutional rights apply equally to every American regardless of skin color or occupation, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tomorrow we have another story proving that accountability, though difficult to achieve, is possible when citizens refuse to accept injustice and fight back with evidence and determination. Because the truth, when captured on camera and defended in court, has the power to transform not just individual lives but entire systems of power.